have a collection of unfinished quilts that have been sitting around for a couple of years now. Each of these quilts is made using secondhand sheets, making them very economical. I thought I'd take you along with me so you can see what it's like to use sheets for the quilt top, the backing, the binding, and even the batting in the middle of the quilt. One of these sheets is made entirely from thrift store sheets, which means the entire quilt was made with less than $10 of supplies. I love how quilts look, the classic beauty of them. Handmade quilts feel as if you're tucking someone in with a little extra love at bedtime. Quilts have a good weight to them, and you have complete control in the materials while making them. I have a really hard time finding blankets for our beds that are cotton on the outside that also have cotton batting on the inside. Most of what I ever find is polyester batting. A handful of years ago, I did find a commercially made bedspread that was made with all cotton, including cotton batting, but it was so poorly made that it only held up for a couple of years before it had completely fallen apart. It was such a waste of money, and with how much I spent on it, it was doubly disappointing. I usually start a quilt very excited for what the final product will look like, and then after I have the satisfaction of seeing that vision mostly come to reality when I've finished a good portion of the quilt top, I get bored and disheartened by how long the process of making a quilt is, and the quilt becomes abandoned. So now I've accumulated 3 unfinished quilts, and I've told myself that I must finish all of these quilts before I start any new sewing projects. This first quilt top is made with flannel sheets and has a very simple design, and I kept the quilt squares large because even when I started this quilt out, I knew I needed something that would work up faster than more intricate work would. I am not a master quilter. These are very mediocre quilts. Since I'm determined for them to be finished, the work is even lower quality than what I would put out if I were taking my time on these quilts. But truthfully, I'm kept very busy with 5 kids, a homestead, and the blog I run. My quilts where I take my time and put every bit of additional effort into are quilts that will be made a little later down the road. These quilts hold a homely purpose, and I'm happy for them just how they are. Even just using stitches that are much closer together than what are put into factory-made quilts will make them hold up much better than store-bought, even if they are a bit crooked here and there. Instead of getting my iron out, I'm hanging these wrinkly sheets on the line so the sun and wind can iron them for me while I get some other things done. This quilt has a cotton sheet for the back of the quilt and a cotton sheet in the middle of the quilt for batting. If I did it over again, I would have used a cotton flannel sheet for the batting of this quilt instead of a lightweight cotton, but since the quilt top was made with a few cotton flannel sheets, it still has a nice drape, weight, and airy warmth to it. Another reminder to how imperfect these quilts are is the fact that I had to get in touch with my sister-in-law, who is a master quilter, to ask her where I'm even supposed to start on the quilt when quilting the layers together. Often I just wing it and start wherever, but she says the best place to start is in the middle of the quilt sandwich, and starting here certainly prevented the quilt from bunching up in any spots. started this baby quilt when I was expecting my 5th child. I never finished it before the birth, so I'm finishing it this week too. The quilt top for this quilt is made from quilting fabric, and I have cotton crib-sized batting for the middle. The back of this quilt is made from a lightweight cotton thrift store sheet. The sheet on the back of this quilt is much softer than the quilting fabric on the top of this quilt. I think we all hold a bit too tightly to perfectionism in sewing. I admire the skills of expert sewists, but oftentimes I think it intimidates many, including myself, to just enjoy the crafting process and to try anyway. There is no shame in imperfect sewing projects, where there are misunderstood steps, parts of the projects where you put your own guesswork into, or places where you can still tell your seam ripper made a visit to when looking closely. A handmade quilt is still a handmade quilt, whether or not it's showcase quality, and I think it's better to finish the project, even if you know it's not going to be a perfect result. Sewing a quilt on a Treadle sewing machine may also change my relationship with quilts in the future. On my electric machine, even though it's a good machine, it would often throw a fit whenever I would try to sew through any thicker fabrics. I had absolutely no issues sewing any of these quilts on my Treadle machine, as in 0 issues at all. I can't remember the last major sewing project I've tackled where I didn't have to stop at least once to fight with my electric sewing machine. This Treadle has not complained once since working on these quilts. There are much neater ways to sew on the binding, but if I sew the back of this binding on the quilt by hand, it is going to sit around for another 2 years unfinished. This quilt is all about time savers, so it can be finished today. The last quilt I'm finishing today is this twin-sized quilt. This quilt has been unfinished for the longest amount of time. It's actually been used without the binding on it for a couple of years now. I'm cutting up a fitted sheet to make binding out of it for this quilt. First, I cut out the elastic off the fitted sheet. Then I cut the corners of the sheet so that it would lay flat. This made it possible for me to be able to use my rotary cutter and cutting board when cutting out some binding for the quilt. I am so happy to have these quilts finished. I'll have this whole process of making quilts from sheets typed up into a blog post if you'd like to check it out in the description below. If you like simple, imperfect sewing, I want to welcome you into this space with me. Thank you for being here. I hope something sweet finds its way to your sewing table this week.